On a vibrant night in New Orleans, the warmth of the city embraced everyone, venturing through the illuminated streets, where the sound of jazz seemed to dance along with the people. The Blue Note, a bar famous for its live performances, was packed with music and dance lovers. Among the crowd, Sophie and Ben stood out, not just for their talent, but for the palpable chemistry between them. In a red dress that moved as if it had a life of its own, Sophie twirled and leaped to the rhythm of the music, her eyes sparkling with joy. Ben, beside her, was the perfect partner, his body moving in harmony with hers. "You're stunning tonight," Ben whispered, a playful smile on his face as he pulled her closer, their fingers entwined. "Only because you're here," Sophie replied, laughing as he lifted her into a spin. The bar was full, but it felt like they were the only ones in the world. The notes of the saxophone filled the air, and the audience, enchanted, couldn't take their eyes off them. Every movement was a silent conversation, a dialogue of trust and love that spoke louder than any words. After a performance that made the audience burst into applause, Sophie and Ben retreated to a quieter corner of the bar. Sitting at a table, under the soft light of a lamp, they caught their breath from the frenzy of the dance. The scent of bourbon and local cuisine filled the air, and the atmosphere was almost magical. "Have you thought about the upcoming tournament?" Ben asked, his gaze distant, as if he was thinking about more than just the competition. "Of course, it's our chance to show the world what we can do," Sophie replied, her voice full of enthusiasm. "We need to train even more. We could be professional dancers, Ben. Imagine that." "Yeah, but what if we're not good enough?" The insecurity in Ben's voice was unmistakable, and Sophie noticed the shadow that crossed his face. "Hey, look at me," she said, holding his hand. "We're a team. Together, we can conquer anything. You're an amazing dancer, and I believe in you. Let's work hard and show everyone what we're capable of." Ben smiled, but doubt still lingered over him. "What if I fail? What if I disappoint you?" "There's no way to disappoint someone who loves dance as much as you do," Sophie replied, looking into his eyes. "Believe in me and believe in us." The conversation flowed to dreams and aspirations as the music in the background continued to play the notes of jazz, filling the space between them. But in the background, a shadow of uncertainty began to form in Sophie's mind. The sparkle in Ben's eyes seemed dimmed by something she couldn't quite identify. Later that night, when they got home, Sophie decided to review a recording of their performance. The screen's glow lit up her face as she watched, absorbing every movement, every step. But in the middle of the recording, something distracted her. Ben's phone vibrated on the table. Curious, she glanced at the screen and saw a message from Clara, a dance colleague who had always been friendly but somehow never made her feel completely at ease. "Hi, Ben! Can't wait to rehearse tomorrow. We're going to rock the tournament." Sophie felt a pang of unease. The message was ambiguous and left a bitter taste in her mouth. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the negative thoughts that began to surface. "I can't let this get to me," she thought. "Ben is my partner, and he loves me. This doesn't mean anything." But the doubt was there, whispering in her ear. With a determined movement, Sophie decided to ignore the message and focused on the dance, on the music that still echoed in her mind. What mattered was the connection they had when they danced together, and she would strive to keep that flame alive, even if the shadows of uncertainty began to form around her. In the dance studio, the smell of polished wood and the sound of soft music filled the air. Sophie was focused on her rehearsal, but her eyes couldn't help but drift towards Ben and Clara. The way they moved together seemed magical, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. Every spin and every step Ben took beside Clara made Sophie's heart tighten, as if a shadow had settled over her soul. She tried to ignore it, but the weight of betrayal that began to form in her mind was inescapable. "Come on, Sophie, try to focus," said Mia, her best friend, who was watching from a corner. Mia had a look of concern, but also of determination. She knew what was going through Sophie's mind. I know," Sophie replied, trying to push away the dark thoughts. But the truth is, even when she was dancing, her mind was in turmoil. The frantic rhythm of the music seemed to clash with her racing heart. "It's just that I can't help it. They seem so close." "You need to talk to him, Sophie. Don't let these doubts grow. What you saw on the phone, and now this. It's too much, Mia encouraged her. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in her chest. I'll talk to him, but what if he says I'm being paranoid? What if it's nothing? What if it is? Mia questioned, with a serious look. You can't let this go. You deserve to know the truth. At the end of the rehearsal, Sophie decided it was time to confront Ben. She approached him, who was stretching beside Clara. The sight of them together was painful, but Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and addressed Ben. Can we talk? Sophie asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. Sure, Sophie. What's up? Ben replied with a smile that couldn't hide the tension on his face. Clara, noticing the change in the atmosphere, stepped back a bit, but not without casting a curious glance at the two. I need to know what's going on between you and Clara, Sophie began, her voice firmer than she felt. I saw the message on the phone and now I see you two dancing together like you're a pair. Ben frowned, surprised. What? Sophie, you know Clara is just a friend. She's just helping me with some steps I'm having trouble with, nothing more. But that's what worries me. You're so close to her, and I feel like I'm losing you, Sophie said, the emotion almost overflowing. I don't want to be the insecure girl, but I can't help it. Sophie, you're the only one I want, the only one I love. This is just a dance, Ben reassured her, holding her hands. Please trust me. The look in Ben's eyes was sincere, but the words didn't seem to carry the weight they used to. Sophie's insecurity settled in her heart like a persistent shadow, and even with Ben's promises, the trust she once had began to fade. I want to believe you, Ben, but it's hard, Sophie whispered, looking down. I don't want to feel like this. I need time. I understand, Ben replied, the frustration evident in his voice. But you need to know that there's no one else. I'm yours, Sophie. I've always been. She stepped back, feeling the weight of the words left unsaid. The sense of betrayal and uncertainty accompanied her, like an echo that wouldn't leave her in peace. As she walked away, the music began to play again, but the melody that once made her feel alive now sounded distant, as if she were listening through a closed door. That night, while getting ready for the tournament, Sophie found a dance necklace lying on the floor. It was a delicate necklace, with details that seemed to have belonged to Clara. The weight of the betrayal hit her like a blow, and the doubt that had been just a shadow now became a storm. She held the necklace in her hands, watching it sparkle under the soft light of the room. I need to find out the truth, she thought to herself, determined. What was at stake was more than just a relationship. It was her own identity, her passion for dance, and the trust that had been slowly crumbling. It was time to face reality, no matter how painful it might be. Sophie walked through the streets of New Orleans, the jazz melody floating in the air like a whisper of hope that contrasted with the storm of emotions inside her. With each step, her heart grew heavier. What she had just witnessed left her devastated. Ben and Clara were dancing together in a studio, and the chemistry between them was undeniable. Sophie stopped in a corner, hidden in the shadows, watching the spectacle that was supposed to be just a rehearsal. Movement is a form of communication, Sophie thought, as she watched Ben twirl Clara with a lightness that made her feel even more insignificant. The way he looked at her, how the two of them connected, was like a punch to the gut. The memory of their own dances, those where he lifted her and made her feel like she could touch the sky, now seemed distant and unreal. How could I have been so blind? She whispered to herself as warm tears rolled down her cheeks. She turned away, determined to leave, but a familiar voice interrupted her. It was Mia, her best friend, who had arrived without her noticing. Sophie, what are you doing here? Mia asked, concerned as she noticed Sophie's dejected expression. I just needed a moment alone, Sophie replied, trying to wipe away the tears before Mia could notice. You're crying. What happened? Mia insisted, coming closer. Sophie hesitated, but there was no way to hide the pain. I saw Ben dancing with Clara. They seemed so close, so happy, Sophie confessed, her voice trembling. Mia frowned, worried. Sophie, you can't let this bring you down. You love dance. The tournament is coming up, and you need to show everyone your strength, not just Ben. How can I dance knowing he might be with someone else? It doesn't make sense, Sophie replied, frustration overflowing. It makes perfect sense. Dance is your passion. That's something that should never be taken away from you, regardless of what Ben did. Show him that you're stronger than he thinks. Don't give him the power to destroy what you love, Mia exclaimed, holding Sophie's arms, as if she could transfer confidence through touch. Sophie looked into her friend's eyes, and for the first time since it all began, she felt a spark of determination. You're right. I won't let this stop me from dancing. I need to do this for myself, she decided, her voice firmer. Great. Let's go to the studio now and start rehearsing your solo. Let's create something amazing, Mia said, smiling. The following hours were a battle against the pain, but also a rediscovery of her identity. Sophie threw herself into the rehearsals, each movement becoming a way to express her agony and her strength. She danced with an intensity she didn't know she possessed, her soul manifesting in every step, every spin, and every leap. The music that once reminded her of Ben now became her refuge. She began to compose a choreography that spoke of overcoming, of pain and liberation. As she practiced, Sophie felt the sweat dripping down her forehead, but she also felt that she was rebuilding herself. I am more than his betrayal. I am a dancer, she murmured to herself as she looked at her reflection in the studio mirror. With each movement, her confidence grew, and the image of Ben seemed to dissipate, giving way to a new Sophie, stronger and more determined. That night, she lay in bed with her heart still heavy, but her spirit lighter. The path ahead was uncertain, but she had decided that she wouldn't let Ben's betrayal define who she was. Dance was her passion, and she was determined to dance not just for him, but for herself. After all, life is a dance, and Sophie was ready to find her rhythm again. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the pulsating energy of the tournament around her. The hall was full of competitors and spectators, all eager to witness the talents on display. The smell of sweat and the anticipation in the air enveloped her as she prepared for her solo. The music began to play, and she knew it was her moment to shine. Slowly, Sophie let herself be carried away by the soft melody that filled the room. She moved with an intensity that surprised even herself, each step a reflection of her pain, her struggle, and above all, her determination. The audience watched her in reverent silence as she danced, her expression transforming into a mix of strength and vulnerability. As she looked into the audience, her eyes met Ben's, who was at a considerable distance, but seemed closer than ever. His expression was a mixture of admiration and anguish, and it encouraged her even more. This is for me, Sophie thought, as she spun and leaped, her soul entwined with the music. She felt every note vibrating through her body, each movement a declaration of independence. The balance between her feelings for Ben and the need to assert herself as a dancer drove her. The solo was more than a performance, it was a cry for freedom. When the number ended, the hall erupted in applause. Sophie smiled, breathless, her heart pounding. She wasn't just dancing for the audience, she was dancing for herself, for the woman she was becoming. Ben, from the outside, felt a lump in his throat. He watched her, admiring not only her skill, but the strength that now shone with such clarity. She's radiant, he thought, remembering how that same energy had been lost when trust was broken. After the performance, Sophie was surrounded by applause and congratulations. But her mind was elsewhere, focused on Ben, who was cautiously approaching. He looked nervous, as if he were about to face judgment. Sophie felt a chill in her stomach as she realized that the moment to confront him had come. Sophie, he began, his voice trembling. I need to talk to you. She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. About what, Ben? About Clara? Or about how you destroyed the trust I had in you? I know I messed up, he said, his eyes filled with regret. But you need to understand that Clara is just a friend. I made a mistake by not being honest from the start. A mistake? Sophie laughed, but there was no joy in her words. This is more than a mistake, Ben. I saw you two dancing together. You let yourself be carried away by the connection you had with her. What am I to you? Just an option? No, that's not it, Ben exclaimed, desperate. I love you, Sophie. You're the only one I truly want to be with. I just didn't know how to deal with my insecurities. Sophie felt a wave of conflicting emotions. The love that still existed within her fought against the betrayal that had marked her. Ben, I don't know if I can trust you again. The pain you caused me is deep. Please, he pleaded. taking a step forward. Give me a chance to show that I can change. I want to make things right. I want to fix this, for us. She hesitated, looking at the floor as if searching for answers in the worn wooden boards. I can't just forget what happened. I feel so lost. I don't know who I am without you anymore. You're strong, Sophie, Ben affirmed, his voice now softer. You reinvented yourself today. I saw that. The woman you've become is incredible. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Sophie looked into his eyes, trying to decipher the sincerity in his gaze. The desire to believe him was there, but the doubt still lingered in her heart. You can't just expect me to forgive and forget. Trust is built over time, and you broke what we had. Ben took a step back, clearly shaken. I understand, and I'll fight to regain your trust. I'll be here, waiting, even if you need time. Sophie felt a mix of compassion and determination. Maybe it's better if I go on alone for now. I need to find out who I am without you. And if that means dancing alone, then so be it. Ben's eyes shone with the pain of loss, but he nodded, knowing that this was her decision. As Sophie walked away, she felt a wave of sadness, but also a new determination. She was ready to move forward, no matter what the future held. Sophie was in a dance studio, surrounded by the familiar smell of polished wood and the soft echo of jazz music that filled the air. She looked at herself in the mirror, watching every movement she made, every step she took. Dance now was her refuge, a place where she could forget Ben's betrayal, at least for a moment. Her mind, however, was far from the music. The memories of what had happened in the last few weeks haunted her. The pain of betrayal was still alive, but there was a new determination in her posture. Sophie was determined to rediscover herself. On the other side of the city, Ben felt like a castaway in a sea of regrets. He knew he had messed everything up, and Sophie's absence in his life was a black hole that consumed his happiness. He wandered through a park, watching couples dancing to the rhythm of the music coming from a nearby bar. Their connection was so strong, so pure, that it reminded him of what he had lost. I need to show her that I can change, he thought. With that idea in mind, he decided to sign up for a dance workshop that would start the next day. The day of the workshop arrived, and Ben was nervous. He not only wanted to learn more about dance, but also wanted to show Sophie that he was willing to make an effort. Upon entering the studio, he was met with a pulsating atmosphere of energy and enthusiasm. The instructor, a charismatic dancer known for his unique style, quickly captured everyone's attention. Ben took a deep breath and remembered Sophie, how she always believed in him. He needed to do this. During the classes, as he tried to keep up with the others, Ben came across Clara, the dance colleague who had contributed to his mistake. She smiled, but he looked away, focusing on his own steps, on his own journey. If his mind wandered to the past, he quickly brought it back, reminding himself that, above all, he needed to focus on himself. The music echoed, and Ben danced as if his life depended on it. "Come on, Ben, don't forget to keep your posture," shouted the instructor, encouraging him. Ben smiled, remembering how Sophie used to correct him with affection. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining that he was dancing with her, and it pushed him to try even harder. Every step, every spin, every movement was an attempt to regain what he had lost. After a tiring morning during the break, Ben sat in a corner of the studio, breathless but satisfied. Clara approached him with a concerned air and said, "You seem different, Ben. What happened to you?" He looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and indifference. "I'm just trying to be better, for myself," he replied, not going into details. Clara nodded, but he could see that she wanted more. "And Sophie, have you talked to her?" she asked. The question caught Ben by surprise. He hesitated. "No, I don't know if she wants to hear me," he admitted, the sadness evident in his voice. Clara, noticing the intensity of his gaze, tried to be understanding. "Maybe you should. Sometimes communication is the first step to healing." Ben shook his head. "If I get a chance to see her again, I need to be a different man." "I can't be what I was anymore," he replied, the determination resonating in his words. He stood up and rejoined the group, focusing on every step, every movement, as if he were dancing for Sophie. Meanwhile, Sophie continued to dance, but she missed Ben. The pain of betrayal still haunted her, but there was something in her new routine that made her feel alive again. She was learning not only about dance, but also about her own strength. The music enveloped her, and each rehearsal was a form of liberation. But deep down, there was a voice that questioned her. Could she forgive Ben? The weeks passed, and the workshop not only helped Ben improve his skills, but also transformed him as a person. He learned the importance of being honest with himself and others. Now, the only thing he wanted was to have an honest conversation with Sophie. He didn't know how she would react, but he needed to try. The day of the show was approaching, and both Sophie and Ben were preparing to perform in their respective roles. The anxiety hung in the air, but there was also a silent expectation. Amidst all this, the memories of their moments together, the laughter, the dances, and the dreams shared still echoed in their hearts. The music of New Orleans continued to play, and somehow they both knew that their dances, although separate, were intertwined. Sophie was backstage, feeling the adrenaline pumping through her veins. The day of the tournament final had arrived, and she was nervous but determined. The environment around her was a mixture of laughter, whispers, and the soft sound of jazz that resonated through the walls, creating an electric atmosphere. With her heart pounding, she adjusted the headband, looking at the mirror that reflected her focused expression. Her makeup was flawless, but the true glow came from within. The number she was about to perform wasn't just a dance. It was an expression of her journey of pain, overcoming, and self-discovery. Meanwhile, in the audience, Ben was sitting in a corner, his eyes fixed on the stage entrance. He felt a knot in his stomach, not just from worrying about Sophie, but from the pain of loss that now accompanied him. Every step she took towards the stage was like a reminder of what he had risked. As he saw her step under the bright lights, her presence lit up the room and made his heart race. She was beautiful, and as the music began to play, he allowed himself to breathe, letting himself be carried away by the beauty of the moment. Sophie began to dance, every movement reflecting the inner struggle she had faced in recent months. The solo was a blend of contemporary jazz and classical movements, a fusion that spoke of pain, love, and liberation. The audience was completely absorbed, and Sophie felt like she was floating. She danced not just for Ben, but for herself, to show the world the strength she had found within herself. The applause began to echo, growing in intensity. The audience was on their feet, and the energy in the air was palpable. At the end of her performance, tears streamed down Ben's face as he applauded. He knew, at that moment, that he had lost someone truly special. When Sophie finished, the noise from the audience was deafening. She smiled, feeling fulfilled, as if she had finally found her place in the world. But before she could fully absorb the moment, her phone began to vibrate in her pocket. It was a call, and when she answered, her breath stopped at the voice of the director of a renowned dance studio in New York. He was inviting her to an audition, saying he had seen her performance and that she had undeniable talent. Sophie's heart raced. It was the opportunity she had always dreamed of, a step toward her future. I need to think, she said, still in shock as she listened to the excitement in the director's voice. Then, from across the hall, Ben stood up. He was holding an envelope, his gaze determined. He approached Sophie, who was still in a state of euphoria and confusion. "Sophie, wait!" he shouted, his voice full of emotion. Sophie turned, surprised. "Ben, what are you doing here?" "I brought this for you," he said, handing her the envelope. Before all this, before the betrayal, I organized a surprise. It's an invitation to a dance workshop in New York with the best professionals in the field. I wanted you to go. Sophie froze, looking at the envelope. You organized this? She didn't know if she'd feel happy or hurt. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I made a mistake. I was weak, Sophie. The betrayal was a weakness, and I can't change what I did, but I can try to make it right. You're the only one I truly love. Please, don't let this ruin your future, he pleaded, his eyes full of tears. Sophie looked into the distance, pondering her future. The phone was still in her hand, her two options presenting themselves before her. Embrace the dance opportunity in New York, or try to rebuild what had been broken between her and Ben. The jazz flowed in the background, as if the music itself was asking her to make a decision, to choose her own rhythm. I need time, she finally replied, feeling the weight of the choice. I don't know if I can trust you again, but I also can't let go of following my dream. And there, under the soft light of the theater, Sophie found herself at a crossroads where the dance of life intertwined with her deepest emotions, making it clear that, regardless of the choice, the path she would take would be a unique and personal dance. Reflecting on this story, it's clear that life doesn't always follow the rhythm we expect. Betrayal can be painful, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow, become stronger, and learn more about ourselves and what we really want in a relationship. Have you ever stopped to think about how life's falls, no matter how hard they may be, can be the strength we need to rise with more wisdom? Are you ready to turn pain into power? Let this reflection guide you, and remember that every step, even the hardest ones, is part of your journey. If this story touched you in some way, also check out the video that's appearing on your screen now. In my opinion, it's one of the best stories I've ever told. If you liked what you just heard, you'll undoubtedly love this other story too. So subscribe to the channel, click on the video on your screen now, and I'll see you in a few seconds.